So, if you watched my video from quite a while ago on some of the players that are present in World of Warships, you'll see that I got, let's say, a mixed response. You could also say that the comment section was lively with open debate, but that's like saying World War II was just a slight disagreement. So, being a sucker for punishment, I decided to switch tact and go through some of the players that you might butt into throughout your time playing Battlefield 1, 3, 4, or pretty much any one of these games, because let's face it, they're going to be present in pretty much every one of the Battlefield games at this point, and you've probably met at least some of these players several times over. So with that in mind, let's get into it. So first up, and probably the most obvious of the players that you're going to bump into playing Battlefield, is going to be the camper. And this player is a bit of a strange one, because in general they're going to be spending the majority of the games they play sitting behind doors, in bushes, and generally just doing nothing all game, which kind of begs the question, wouldn't it be better if they actually went camping, like in real life? They'd learn how to make a fire, they could hide in all the bushes they'd want to. Obviously I wouldn't advise them to take a gun with them and shoot at passerbys, but you get the idea. An added bonus would be that they wouldn't be in-game, annoying about 95% of the player base at any one point in time. So everyone wins. But on a serious note, camping can be useful in certain situations. For instance, if you're trying to hold a choke point all by yourself, sure you may be camping, but you're playing the game in such a way that it's necessary for the win, which isn't the worst thing in the world. So let's move along to the next player. The next player is more than a little bit different than that of the camper, and when I say a little, I mean a hell of a lot. It's the respawner. Now if you're not familiar with the respawner, allow me to explain. This player is generally the medic on your squad, or just on your team. Although unlike most of the medics you're going to meet in any of the previous battlefields or the upcoming battlefield, this guy will stick to you like glue, and will always be there to respawn you regardless of the situation. You could teleport into the enemy spawn and die within the first 3 seconds of the game, and this guy would somehow manage to hack into the game and spawn beside you, respawn you, and then disappear just as quickly. On the other hand though, these players also tend to die in a desperate attempt to revive their allies, while putting themselves in very silly situations, trying to get to the top of the leaderboard while not having a single kill in the game. But they're far from the worst, or the best, so let's move along to the next player on the list. The next one is going to be a difficult one to parse through, because well, I'm fairly guilty of doing this for many games in Battlefield, before I actually started getting good at the game. And that thing is none other than being a KDA Guru. Now, much like a guru who leads a cult, being a KDA Guru is going to make you think that you're actually doing something productive in order to help your team win, when in reality all you're doing is inflating that sense of ego a player gets when their KDA goes from 1.5 to 2.5 to 3.5. While all they're doing is sitting in a bush at the bottom right hand corner of a map trying to farm a 1000 meter headshot with a sniper rifle. Now, of course, it would be amiss to say that all the people who play Battlefield, be it Battlefield 1, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 5, or even Battlefield Hardline, yeah, that still exists, and get a really good KDA, are all of this type of player. That's just simply not true. Those players basically drag the dead hunk of meat known as the rest of their team, which usually contains myself, all the way to victory. And for some strange reason, snipers tend to be fairly often the main offenders of this type of play. The first kind, not the second that I just mentioned. But as always, the most important thing in Battlefield is to play the objective. As long as you do that, your KDA doesn't really matter at all. Moving along, so if you're familiar with the next player, then you're probably very familiar with FPS games in general. So let me set a little bit of a scene for you. You'll probably be in a very critical moment in a game where you need to focus, and the next thing you hear is a bunch of static and a voice that clips so much you almost think you're at the hairdresser's. This is usually followed by someone shouting, guys, why are you all so bad? Guys, cap A. Even though A has been capped for the last 5 minutes of the game and we're defending on an operations map, and this is fairly unique to Battlefield, I think, because unlike games like CSGO or Valorant, where that voice chat is pretty much needed in order to win a game, at least at the higher tiers, no such requirement is needed in Battlefield, because let's face it, having 32 Battlefield players all stuck in a lobby screaming down microphones at each other will drop the player base to 0, so quickly DICE will probably never release another Battlefield game again. Although that never seemed to stop Call of Duty, so maybe I'm wrong here. Leave a comment down below if you think I am. I'm pretty used to being called out at this stage, so I think we should move on to the next player. So I pointed out quite a few players that you'll probably bump into in your time playing Battlefield, but they cross paths with yourself not that often, so it can be easy to forget that they exist. However, the professional is going to be one player that you won't be able to not notice, mostly due to the fact that when you press the tab at any point in the game, you'll see their name basically pinned to the top of the leaderboard, and usually mine pinned to the bottom. And while these players might be a fine addition to your own team, when you press the tab and you see at the top of the enemy team listing a player with a score of 32 kills and 3 deaths playing Assault, that's probably going to be a pretty painful experience to play against. And if you see a couple of those players on the enemy team, then the game is probably going to last as long as the time it takes to start Battlefield and Kamikaze and A10 on Gulmund Railway, i.e. not that long. To add to this, if you're ever to meet one of these players in a 1v1, which I have done several times, and speaking from experience, it's going to feel like you're lagging based on how quickly you die. Or at least that was the excuse I told myself to stop myself throwing my computer out the window for the 3rd time that day. These players are the ones you gain the most from. Try following them around for a bit to learn the game sense of Battlefield, or where's the best route to attack a certain objective. These are all the things that are extremely important to a good Battlefield player, and so would be very good to learn, if possible, from some of the best players in the game. Let's move along before I start talking rubbish, which has a very high probability of having already happened. So for the last player, I thought I would make a little bit of a twist and describe basically myself, i.e. the average Battlefield player in any game you wander your way into. So what does this player consist of? Well, for one thing, they generally sit around a 1.0 KDA, but that's not the only thing. These players tend to get stun locked fairly often, and allow me to explain that. Say you're strolling along, minding your own business, and all of a sudden you get sniped by any number of air vehicles in the game. Now, a normal player would chalk it up to bad luck and respawn in the same class, but not the average player. The average player gets stun locked to such an extent that they spend the next 15 minutes respawning with a stinger trying to shoot down that very same plane that killed them, but only dying several times over instead of actually killing the damn thing. Not that that's ever happened to me. Also, as far as vehicles go, they tend not to last long when they get into them. On average, an average player would probably last about 30 seconds in a tank, 20 in a plane, and probably less in a car. But of course that's only based on my anecdotal experiences across many games played, and not completely by myself. And the final thing that an average player does? Well, when they die and look at where to respawn, they think that, hey, respawning on my teammate would probably be a good idea. Except what they fail to see is that there's about 20 enemy players right around that very same teammate, and as soon as they respawn into the game, they're dead once again. And thus that process tends to repeat itself over and over and over and over and over again. Yeah, that's a pretty bad one. So that pretty much sums it up for another video. A little bit of a different twist this time featuring Battlefield, but it's a game that I really do enjoy and will be featuring much more often in the upcoming weeks, all the way up until Battlefield 6 or whatever it's going to be called, releases hopefully this time this year. If you want to watch me play Battlefield or pretty much any number of games, follow me on Twitch. There'll be a link in the description below, but until next time, I'll see you all in the next one.